Last Sunday, we reflected on the reality of suffering. And we said suffering is not merely a problem to be solved, but a mystery that invites us to enter into, because it is only entering into the reality of suffering that we are able to discover its purpose and meaning. One beautiful thing that suffering does to us is it brings us closer to our loved ones. It strengthens relationships among family members. And ultimately, it draws us closer to God. A few days ago, I received a number of text messages telling me, Bishop, the homily last Sunday was very moving, and we cannot help but shed tears. Pwede ba, Bishop, kasi Valentine's Day ngayon, wala mo nang iyakan? And I said, well, according to Ignatius of Loyola, tears are gifts from God. And we cannot manufacture it. They just came to us. They just come to us so spontaneously. So alang-alang sa mga taong nagmamahal ngayon. Yung mga gigil na gigil sa pagmamahal. Yung mga nagsasawa na sa pagmamahal. And those who promise themselves not to love again because of so many hurts that they have received in loving. It's good to look at our readings today, because we are given a picture of a person who is so madly in love. And let us try to see how a person who is so in love enters into the reality of suffering. And today's gospel gives us a particular image of suffering, which is leprosy. No, sanla. And the readings, our first reading from Leviticus, gives us a picture of the life of a leper, how he becomes an outcast and someone who is isolated from the community. So, parang murao sila og so that people will not be contaminated with their sickness. They are placed, kung sa ato pa karon, in a quarantine facility. And therefore, they are isolated from the community. That's the first level of isolation. And then they are isolated from their families. When they go out from the facility, they will carry a placard where it is written, "I am a leper, stay away from me. And aside from the signage, from the placard, they have to shout, "I am unclean, I am unclean, stay away from me." So they are isolated from their loved ones and from the community. But because they are also spiritually unclean, no? So they are not also allowed to enter the temple, the synagogue, to offer prayer. And therefore, aside from isolation from the community, there is also that another level of isolation, which is spiritual. And because of these different levels of isolation, the person feels bad about himself or herself. Maybe he or she will come to a point in which he will be angry at himself. And therefore, the person is not only isolated from the community, from the loved ones, and from God, he is also isolated from himself or herself. And that is a very painful kind of isolation, when you do not like or love yourself anymore. But then, while people stay away from this leper, while people avoid contacts from this person, Jesus enters into the scene. And then this person, keeping his distance, said in a loud voice, "If you wish, you can make me clean. If you wish, you can make me clean." And Jesus, moved with compassion, came closer to this man who feels bad about himself, this man who is isolated from the community and loved ones and from the temple, from the faith community. Jesus came closer to this person and then stretched his hand. And not just stretched his hand and kept his distance, but he came closer to this man. Ug kung unsa ang bawal, gibuhat ni Jesus. He crossed barriers. He touched the person, the leper. Maybe this time of COVID, maybe we ask the question, "Bishop, baka naka-PPE yung si Jesus, no?" No. The only protection that Jesus wore during the time was compassion, was love. Compassion conquers our fears to touch those people who are isolated, Those people who feel bad about themselves, those people who feel so alone, Jesus enters into spaces that even we ourselves who are sick don't want to enter into. And while people are so afraid to have contact with this man because they are afraid to be contaminated, what happened is Jesus was not contaminated by the leprosy. The compassion of Jesus contaminated the leper. By touching the leper, he was well. He was healed. Indeed, love enters into places of isolation. And it is very important to see that this man who feels isolated and who even has a negative feeling towards himself because of his situation, he feels comfortable to be touched by Jesus. In our lives, we have different levels or types of leprosy. It can be physiological. It can be psychological. It can be relational. Problems in the family. Sickness. Spiritual sicknesses. Moral sickness. Dependencies sa droga, sa alcohol, o guban pang klase sa addiction. At times, we are uncomfortable talking about them. We don't want topics to touch it. We don't want to talk about it. We know that there are problems going on in our lives and in the family and in society. But we are not comfortable talking about them. But this man in the gospel, the thing that makes him feel bad about himself, he allowed Jesus to touch it. Maybe it's good to ask ourselves how comfortable we are in allowing Jesus to touch our problems, our dependencies, our sicknesses, our illnesses. Because those things that we deny are difficult to manage. Those things that we deny are difficult to handle. And Jesus can only heal those wounds that we ourselves are willing to be touched. Secondly, Jesus was not afraid to touch the wound that is being experienced by this leper. He is so comfortable touching wounds of people and healing them. Some of us would prefer to set aside time and opportunities to listen to the problems of others, to the wounds and pains of others. We are so uncomfortable with pains, and that is why we cannot enter and penetrate into the pains of others, and we cannot communicate compassion, because compassion can only be communicated to those people who feels comfortable in touching the wounds of others. Maybe there are illnesses in the family. Or vices affecting the family that for a long time we did not talk about. The readings for today are inviting us to accept them, that they are there. I have leprosy. I am sick. I am in pain. I have problems. Can you listen to me? Can we talk about it? Because it is only in talking about it, it is only in listening to the pains of others with compassion that we will experience healing. We will experience being comforted and be consoled because of the compassion of others who are courageous enough to enter into the spaces of our life where we feel so afraid, where we feel so hurt. Today is Pro-Life Sunday. Life, despite all the pains and sufferings, remain to be meaningful and even vibrant when we are surrounded with people who care for us, who show compassion. And in this Valentine's Day, we ask the Lord that we live a life that is committed and willing to love even those people who are considered outcast, and even those people whom we consider as problems and burdens in the family, in our life. I remember 2 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, February 14, 2018, is a very meaningful day for me. because this is the day when I went to the nunciature to talk to the nuncio after a phone call. It was during this day that I said to him, I will say yes to the mission entrusted to me by the Holy Father, that I will be the new bishop of Tandag. And since the time until now, I was exposed to different types of leprosy to my people. But it was a golden opportunity for me to listen to them. And in listening to them, I felt I am most a bishop. We are at our best self when we are filled with compassion in touching the wounds and pains of others, hoping that it will comfort them in their sorrows and pains, and hoping that our compassionate gesture will be blessed by God, so that these people whom we touched will experience the grace that this leper in the gospel experienced, the healing grace of God that restores him to his family, to the community, to the worshiping community, that he can now worship God, not in isolation, but together with the believing community of God. And destroying all these barriers of isolation, he begins to feel good about himself, that he has a value, that because of his experience of the compassion of Jesus, he went out his way. He proclaimed openly the good news that God healed him, that God restored his life, and he will become God's ambassador of mercy. We are all called to be channels of God's mercy, but that can only happen if we are comfortable in allowing Jesus to touch us, to touch those areas where we feel so bad about ourselves. Because it is only in experiencing the compassion of God that we become comfortable in touching the wounds and the pains of other people. And hopefully, people will experience the healing power of Jesus. The healing power of Jesus that makes us experience that the kingdom is at hand. May Jesus Christ be praised.